Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So, I'm the Geordie Saver, and today I've got episode 3 of my podcast, which is called Let's Chat About Money. I'm very pleased to have a special guest on today. So, I've got Joshua from the Art of Money and Communication. He's an opera singer, he's a podcaster, he's got his own communication coaching business as well. So really excited to talk to Joshua. Just before we get into the main video, I just want to flag, as always, that I'm not a financial advisor, and this podcast will be touching on financial topics, but it is just our own personal opinions. So yeah, I'll first of all hand over to Joshua and just see how you want to introduce yourself, if I've missed anything.
I think that's a fantastic introduction. I'm very privileged to be guest number 3 or appearing on episode number 3. I know that I've had you on my podcast. You said it was 2 years ago, so it's great and I can now repay the favor. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, and that's a quite a interesting point, because that's one of the reasons I thought of you for coming on the podcast, because 2 years ago it was actually before I started a YouTube. I actually started a blog, and I started following you on Instagram, and then you reached out and said, "Oh, would you want to come on the podcast?" And doing that podcast was give us a bit of a motivation to actually start my YouTube channel. And I'm a bit biased because I've been on the podcast, but it is actually my favorite UK based personal finance podcast. And I haven't missed an episode, I don't think, since I appeared on it. And I'm still trying to work my way back through the back catalogue. So it's
Uh,
really good.
Thank you so much. That's a huge compliment, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Cool. So I thought what we'll do is I've got 4 main sections for our chat today. I want to talk a bit about your career as an opera singer, because I find that personally quite interesting. I haven't heard much about that sort of career path and how that works money wise. We'll then touch on podcasting. So you've been a podcaster now for a few years. You've built up quite an audience. I'm just interested to know what goes on behind the scenes and the things that people might not expect about hosting a podcast. We'll then go on to talk about finances, because in your podcast, the main focus of it, or has been in the past, has been around other people's finances, what they do with their money. So I'm interested to know about what you do with your money. And
Mhm.
then finally, I thought it'd be good to chat about your communication business. I've seen your Instagram and the videos that you post on there about top tips for communication. And yeah, I'd like to know more about where that started and how you got that experience. So yeah, maybe we'll start with the opera singing. And my first question to you is, how did you get into opera singing in the first place?
Well, typically to become an opera singer, it's not something that you start as a child. So you need some type of other musical education. And often what happens is when you meet other opera singers at college, maybe it's 19 or 20, you hear about all of the different experiences that people have. So some people have done amateur dramatics, some people have sung in choirs, some people have studied another instrument and realized that they had a voice. But for me, it was a mixture of things. So singing lessons as a kid, amateur dramatics, and then a group of people around me at a young age saying, I think you've got a voice. I think there's something here that you can pursue. And I was very fortunate that every step of the way, there was that next person saying, this is what you should go, or you should speak to this person. And it was just a very natural process that led me to move into London when I was 19 years old and studying at one of the top music schools there. And that's when the whole world started to open up for me about what
Mm,
this, because I didn't really have a particular interest in opera. I might have, I can remember one singing teacher saying to my parents, you need to take him to an opera to experience this for the first time. But I wasn't all that fussed, to be honest. But as I got older, about 17 or 18, it's this music bug really hit me. And I thought, man, I really like this music. This is so cool. So it was the music that appealed to me, not so much the drama. As I've got older, I think it's more equalized, that I'm equally as interested in the drama side as I am the music. And it's a very rich profession. There's lots of challenges, lots of things that I learned. So you've got languages, you've got movement on stage, you've got communication, meeting people, doing interviews like this. So it's a wide spectrum of things, but a very rich career.
Mm. And you mentioned about going to London and moving there at 19. So was from that early age, was that your career pathway that you thought you're going to become a professional opera singer and do the training?
I think from say 15, I can remember in school you had to do like a careers day, and there was this massive book full of full of career options that you could pick. And I can remember going to the letter M and seeing the word musician, and there was this paragraph written about what it means to be a musician that was actually quite demoralizing. It was saying
Mm,
how hard the career is, and that a very, very small proportion of people will ever make it into this career. And I found that interesting, first of all, which is absolutely true. It can be a very, very difficult profession across the board to get into. But there was something within me saying, "Oh, forget what this person says. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna make a success of that." And I really had that self-belief. And I think that that self-belief came from the people that are around me, encouraging me to explore and to have fun with it. And that was great. I'm so thankful for that.
mm. Yeah, and I think, do you think that being young helped you to take that risk? I was speaking to someone last week and they said, from their view, when you're young and you starting a business or exploring different career paths, because you've got youth on your side, you can have that thought of, well, if it doesn't work out, I've still got plenty of time to do something else. Was that something that you
Mm.
felt as well, maybe consciously or unconsciously?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, that the youthful quality, the naivety can really work in your favor. So later on then in my career, after college, I had the opportunity to move to Germany. And to be honest, it wasn't something that I wanted to do at all. But I was applying. What you can do is you can apply for apprenticeships, essentially, that you can become a young opera singer in a company. They take you under their wing and do a mixture of roles and concerts. And there's a big, big opera scene in Germany. There's a lot more work there than there is in the UK and other European countries. So I thought, well, I'll go and see what's happening over in Germany. And I went to the largest opera house in Germany, the most famous, with the most famous singers, completely unaware about what I was doing. And it was
Mm,
that naivety that just allowed me to completely be myself. And I could see everyone else around me freaking out about the audition and the pressure. And I thought, I don't really want to come here anyway. I'm just doing it for the sake of doing
mm,
it. And that helped me so much. And interestingly, 2 years of spending time at that theater, my mentality then started to change. You learn more, which is great, but you
yeah.
lose that sense of naivety, which can help so much in learning things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it makes me think, I'm a big pop music fan, and one of the things that happens is that you'll have music artists who have fantastic debut albums,
Mm.
and part of the reason why they release such a good first album is because they go into it and they don't understand necessarily what the pressures are from, like, record
Yeah.
companies may say when they then, so if they have success for album number one, then they've got all that pressure on the shoulders and they've got these um goals to meet, and because that mental pressure is there, they don't have the same sort of risk taking attitude or uh, belief to do what they want to do, that they kind of follow what other people are saying. So yeah, it's an interesting
Mm,
thought.
mm. And the pandemic was interesting in itself because, of course, you're taken away from the stage. But when I compare what I'm doing at the moment, I know one of your questions is, what do I do on a typical day? We'll get to that. But at the moment, this production that I'm doing, the amount of adrenaline that runs through my body, it's absolutely off the scale.
Wow.
And it's sometimes you forget that you have that experience. It's so, so thrilling to do. There's so much that happens that it's a big part of the career, but can almost become somewhat addictive. I can see why people always are trying to chase that high to get more performances or do more crazy things or whatever. I
Mm,
can resonate with that somehow.
mm. So you've touched on it already, and it is my next question. So what does a typical day look like for you? So we're speaking now this morning. You're actually 2 hours ahead because you're in Finland for work at the moment. It seems like a very different sort of lifestyle to a typical 9 to 5 office job. So yeah, do you want to say more about what your day as an opera singer normally looks like?
Sure. Well, it's definitely not the 9 to 5. And the way that I normally sum this up is there is no structured day. There is no normal or typical day unless you're rehearsing a production. You know that you're going to the theatre at a certain time and the rehearsals are day in, day out. But even with that, there's no structure because some days you rehearse at 10, some days you rehearse at 3, some days you rehearse at, it's always changing. But to answer your question, or try to answer your question, today's a show day. So I'll just run you through what happens on a show day. So woke up this morning, hydrating, always good to hydrate well in advance of the show. And now I'm doing something completely different, like doing this podcast. But in the back of my mind, I'll be thinking, right, I've got a show this evening. Once I hop off this call, I'll be doing little bits of administration, social media, keeping it nice and light. But the main object of the day is to think about the show, which starts at 7 o'clock. I'll head down to the theatre about 5 o'clock and I'll get makeup done, put my costume on, do some warm-ups. The act will start. It's a big part for me here. It's really, really intense. So after act one, I am dripping with sweat. It is exhausting. So Act One finishes, and then get back into the makeup chair because I got to touch up my makeup because I've sweated it all off. It's disgusting. And then hydrate a little bit more. Act Two finishes. You do the applause, the curtain call. Hopefully, speak to your colleagues about how the show went. That today is show 5, so we're getting into the swing of how it's going. And really, after that performance, you're on such a high. You know, you've had people clapping for you, and it's a wonderful experience where you feel like you're sharing part of your artistic souls, let's say, and then it's back to normal life. So I might go to. I was thinking about going to the Taco Bell tonight to have a cheeky Coke Zero, and just I like to sit there. And often I crash after a performance because it's such a steep decline where you're just like, oh my gosh. And then tomorrow, flying back to London. So I'll be packing my bags in the morning or this evening, some point today, and out the door about 9 o'clock. And then a very, very long 12 hours or something to get back to my place in London. So
Mm.
that gives you a couple of insights.
Yeah, and so you're saying it's like no day is typical. You've got quite a lot of variability from week to week. Does that suit your natural personality or tendencies? So when you were young, do you like things to be more spontaneous and changing all the time and ad hoc?
Absolutely. I love being spontaneous. I have the privilege of being here in this town and getting to meet people in the community. And there is a true sense of community here that I don't really get in London. So it's great to learn about Finnish culture and everything. But if I were to ask myself, would you like to live here for the next 5 or 10 years? The answer would be no. I wouldn't see myself here because it's quite a
Mm,
small town. It doesn't appeal to me. So I love having the chance to go to different places. But also as a musician, I do think it's really important to have a base, to know where your home is, because that is the thing that's grounding. If you're constantly on the road, then you lose your sense of identity. So just last week, even though I had 3 or 4 days at home. It's a long way. It took me 14 hours to get home. But I had that in my mind. I hadn't been home in 6 weeks. And I thought, right, I just want to be in my flat. I want to sleep in my own bed and reestablish this is where home is. And then I can go on the road again. So it's funny the things that you do to do that.
yeah. I was in a bookshop yesterday and there was actually a book about how to be a digital nomad, and that's something I always find an interesting concept. It's not something that I would like to do because I have that call into to having a permanent base. So even if I like the idea of traveling in the future and spending maybe a month or so in another country, but I couldn't imagine always being on the move and never having that place where you can retreat to and know that it feels like home. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it'd be very, very challenging. And indeed, the people that I see that are on the road all of the time, you get to then see the other side of their personality, where you see that that does start to grate on life and has implications for family and all those types of things. So finding that sweet balance is it's a difficult thing to do as a musician because you're at the whims of the career. But I just try to take each day that it comes and try and find that good balance for myself.
Okay. So my next question is, what is the career like from a money perspective? You can share as much or as little information on this as you like, but for me personally, I don't have any idea about what pay is like as an opera singer or how regular it is or irregular.
Mm. It's pretty much a hidden secret. Not many people speak about it unless some singers speak about it one on one. So if you get close with a colleague in a contract, you might say, "What's your salary for this?" But it's considered hidden information as it is in lots of other professions.
Mm,
But one thing for sure is there is a 1% in this, a top 1% in this career. And they are the people that sing all around the world at the biggest opera houses. And of course, bigger opera houses means more seats means more tickets means more fee for the singers. And those people in the 1% they're earning decent money. When I say decent, it'll be in the millions. So,
mm,
but that is a very, very small proportion. So you can aim for the top 1%. There's very few people that attain it. And then beyond that, I'd say there's another say 10 to 20% of people that have a good enough career that they can make things work and have regular enough work. And then the further that you get on, I think that then falls into the stereotype of what people think about making music or making music your career, is that the work is irregular, the pay is poor, and it can be somewhat of a struggle. But essentially, there's lots of different things that equates to this, but where you're performing matters a lot. So if you think about stand-up comedy, for example, I see these guys on TikTok doing tours of like 60 venues, and it's them. There's probably a couple of people in the staff in the theater, people selling the tickets, a very, very small team, and they can fill a theater of 200. Great. Doesn't work so much as a as an opera singer. You think
yeah.
about the scale of opera. So the production that we're doing now, there's five principals, a chorus of 45, orchestra of, I don't know, 40, 50, theater staff, ticket staff. The production's costing about 500,000 euros to put on, but that's actually in small scale. That's it. Typically costs about a million pounds, million euros to put on production. So opera is expensive, and that means that finding the work can be tricky sometimes. Making it work, sometimes the pay isn't there, and you have to think, well, what do I do? But it's look from a monetary perspective. For me, I've had some great years, wonderful years where I've had really fantastic musical experiences that I've enjoyed so much, and I've been paid handsomely for that. And then other years where, I mean, I think about the pandemic, I was almost stripped down to zero. It was really, really, really tough. So you just got to go with that. But there have been some years. For example, last year was the best year of my career, which came as a surprise. But that meant maxing out the ISA, so the 20,000 pounds tax free was sorted, and it's the same for this tax year. But not all tax years are going to be the same, so you can't become complacent, if
Mm.
that answers your question.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I suppose when I listen to your podcast and I hear about the different things that you're trying out, non-opera related, I get the sense that you like to try and build up multiple sources of income. So you try and use, whatever skills you've got, you try and think, can I make some money out of this? So, I mean, we'll talk in detail about the podcasting and the communications business, but is building up multiple sources of income, has that always been a goal of yours since you started on the opera career, or is it just something that you've thought about in the past few years?
No, it wasn't always a goal. I started out with the mentality, and this is going back to what we were saying earlier on about having people around you and being encouraging and being naive. There is this mentality within the opera profession that if you're an opera singer, you should stay pure, so to say. That
Mm,
if the more dedicated you are to the art form, the better of an artist you are. And I can understand that mentality quite a lot if the profession were to give you what you ask of it. So if there's regular work, if you're able to have that sense of structure in this career that is so up and down. I would get that, but sometimes I have days where I go, right, well, I've got a gap of 2 weeks, or I've got a gap of a month until my next thing. It might be a piece that I've already done before. So am I really going to spend a month preparing for something that I've already done in the past? Well, no. So I try to find this balance myself, and I haven't figured it out yet, but about the age of, well, essentially when I found the personal finance community in 2018, I then started to realize additional income streams could be a really, really wise thing to think about. And it's something that I've pursued since, never forgetting that being an opera singer is my main source of income. Nothing is ever going to come close to overtaking that. But having those additional streams of income can be very helpful, and helpful in not just a financial sense, but even in a mental sense. So something I shared in my last podcast, or the podcast before that, was that by teaching a communication coaching, cost of living here in Finland is very high. And I haven't been paid anything for this contract yet. I probably won't be for another 2 months. That means 3, maybe 4 months without doing all of the work but not receiving any money. So for me to do a coaching and to receive, say, £100, let's say, and then I go to the shop and I spend £60, it really helps me to be able
mm,
to manage that mentality. I call it like monkey man brain: money come in, money come out, right? And that helps. Whereas the way that it works in opera is you have those big chunks coming in, and that can be great, but it means that you're waiting for those chunks. So you have to be
yeah,
really financially disciplined. So I like the little streams of additional income coming in. It's very helpful.
yeah. And you mentioned there that you learned more about or you were exposed to the personal finance community a lot more in 2018. And what do you think it was that made you think, actually, I'm going to start a podcast on this topic? Because I suppose the natural avenue for you might have thought, actually, I'm going to do a podcast all about opera singing, but why was it that personal finance that was the subject?
I got the impression that I found my community immediately, and it was, I always knew that I was interested in business and money and frugality to a certain extent as well, but I didn't know that there was a mass group of other people that are also interested in this topic. So when I discovered that, I was very shocked and excited. Oh, this is great! I can listen to other stories from other people. So I think it was from a sense of wanting to contribute to that community, and also, of course, lockdown.
Yeah.
So I started April 2020, just after the horrendous lockdown, as many people did. Since then, a lot of people have given up, but I continue to do it. Why? Because I enjoy it. Quite simply, it's a source of fun for me. I really enjoy it. I had a very close friend of mine that happened to listen to a podcast episode just a couple of days ago, and she has no interest in finance whatsoever. But for her, it seems it seemed like a success. And that was very interesting for me. She was asking lots of questions. How many downloads? How many hours do you take to all of the technical questions? But really not understanding that the reason that I do it is because I enjoy it. Almost like a hobby. And all of the other results have come from that underlying desire to want to create content and to make it fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's definitely a good, fun podcast to listen to. I think what I really like about it when I listen is that you get a real range of guests on to talk about money, and you also have that personal element to it where you will talk to your partner every so often about money and about how what your attitudes to money are and things, and that's really interesting to listen to.
Mm.
Um, so my next question is how so you started in lockdown. How did you go about finding guests and encouraging them to go on the podcast when, at that point you didn't have any back catalogue of podcasts or successes for them to look back on?
Mm. Well, it's interesting. We can tie two ideas together because that naivety that I experienced in opera is also absolutely applicable to podcasting. So I didn't really think about it as people are not going to want to come on the podcast because there are no other episodes. I started with a solo episode, and then I already was connecting with people on Instagram during that lockdown period. And it felt like a very natural thing to do, to reach out and say, would you be interested in having a chat? And people were very gracious, and a lot of them said yes. Some people said no. And at the time, I was like, why are they saying no? That's ridiculous. Why don't they want to come on my podcast? But everyone has different schedules and different priorities. I understand it. A bit frustrating sometimes, I guess. There's some people that I would love to have on the podcast, but for some reason they have no desire to do so. And then you see them on something else. Maybe it's something that's slightly smaller, and you go, all right, okay, fine. but that happens. So that was an important part, just getting started, and you learn a lot by just doing. And I think analysis paralysis can be a big problem for a lot of content creators. But I can say with absolute clarity that the one form of content that comes most naturally to me and I don't overthink is podcasting.
Yeah.
So if it's YouTube, there's visuals. If it's Instagram, there's the algorithm. If it's TikTok, there's trends. And with podcasting, I'm like, oh, forget it. Like, I'm just going to share
Yeah.
what the guest is saying and try and do the best job of it. And
Yeah.
it's very simple and I love that simplicity. And I'm imagining that resonates for the listeners too. So that's how I find guests, mainly Instagram, occasionally Twitter. A tip that's works for me, or something that I've learned by doing this a few times, is no one ever likes it if you reach out to them immediately and you go, oh, fantastic page, come on my podcast. There's not 9 times out of 10, it never works. Build a rapport with people, like some of their posts, take it easy, don't jump straight in there,
Yeah.
and just create that connection. And then say, I've really been enjoying your content. Would you like to come on the podcast? And that has a much better success rate.
Yeah. And one of the things you said there that resonates with me as someone who's, I've been creating YouTube content for a while now, starting these podcast style episodes, is the just getting started and just doing it and learning. Because I think a lot of the things that puts me off mindset wise when thinking about creating content is the thought of, oh, I have to be perfect at certain elements of it, because the things that I listen to or watch are all very perfected. But actually, I've learned that actually you can just, once you start, you only perfect things by starting and then slowly learning through your mistakes and doing things. And there's never going to be a perfect moment where you're already perfect at doing something. That's just not how things work.
Absolutely. And people enjoy the journey. So one of my most listened to episodes is my first episode, which is cringeworthy for me because it was so poorly thought through. The audio quality was terrible, but people like to hear that journey. And what I do find interesting for podcasting as well is that as podcasts develop, as they become more viral, or if they go through the various editing stages, I begin to like them less. So those podcasts that are hidden gems, or that they do have that easygoing quality, I enjoy the most. So an example that I see quite a lot is the Stephen Bartlett podcast, Diary of a CEO. If you go to look at some of the comments on iTunes about that, there's lots of positive comments, but the long-term listeners of the podcast are a huge proportion of them saying clickbait, not interested, it's just an agenda. And you go back to listen to some of the early ones, and it was just the feeling was a little bit different. And I think it's a shame when people feel that that quality is lost. So that's always something that I'm trying to think about carefully for myself, and it helps me certainly thinking that the podcast is a hobby, because I don't have that drive to monetize it. I just go, well, it is what it is, and I try. It's always evolving, though. It's never the same. So I might say that today, but maybe it might change in the future. You just got to go with the flow.
Just touching on money and monetization, has the podcast benefited you financially in any way, or have the costs of mic and software, has that outweighed any potential financial benefit?
Well, I don't know the specific numbers. My inclination would be, so it costs $15. I use a platform called Buzzsprout. $15 a month to run the podcast, which is what, 12 pounds, British pounds. And I've been running it for 12 years. 12 years, sorry, for 3 years. But over the last 16 months, I've been running ads. That was just something that came up through the Buzzsprout website, that they offered to do that. And I thought, well, if I could just click a button and add an ad, that seems pretty easy to do. And that also then contributes to to the running of the pod. And at the moment, I think I've made $1,200 or something. So when you consider this microphone costs £300, and there's various equipment, I would say it's break even at the moment after 3 years. But some people will consider that an absolute failure. I consider it to be a great success. If someone writes to me and they say that they enjoy it, then that's great.
And that's what I was going to touch on next, was what have the non-financial benefits been? So have you found any growth in yourself from doing the podcast? What have you found there?
Well, the first selfish thing to say is that I really enjoy having conversations with people. I've always been someone that likes deep chats. Let's say my friends would make fun of me in college, saying, "Oh, you're so deep." And I was thinking about this question as you sent them over last night, thinking that, podcasting is another form of that. And it's having a one-on-one conversation with people and just getting to explore various different topics. So that's what's in it for me. I don't like the editing process in particular. It's the conversations that keep me going, that inspire me. And sometimes I come away from chats and I go, wasn't that great? I'm really excited to share that with other people. I think they would really benefit from that. And I think from a perspective of self-development, I think that one thing that I have definitely learned is that there's a common theme that with people that are trying to pay off debt, or they're investing, or they're growing a business, or across the board, they have this quality that they have made a decision that they want to better themselves, and they've set themselves a goal and they're moving towards that. And every single guest that I've had on the podcast has had that quality. And it's that quality that I don't see out in the street all the time, which it separates the people that I'm interviewing. They're a little bit different. And I think I'm always trying to ask the question, why are you different? Why are you doing this? So what has made you make this decision? And I'm sure that other people recognize that too. But yeah, it's a good question, because as I looked back, I did a compilation episode for 2023, And I went, oh my gosh, I've interviewed so many people. Sometimes you forget. You're like, oh yeah, I remember this person. We had this conversation.
Yeah,
So it's getting to the stage where it's a little overwhelming actually, because you have so many different conversations. But there are certainly some that really stand out.
great. And what are so we're in 2024 now, what are your goals with the podcast going forward? Is it more of what you've been doing so far, or have you got any different angles that you're going to be taking it in?
So one goal that I would have for 2024 would absolutely to stay consistent. So I used to do episodes once a week, but now I've scaled down to bi-weekly episodes, and I think that works well for it being a hobby. I did have a hard conversation with myself, which was confusing for some time because I'm so passionate about this topic, but I had to take a step back and ask myself, is this a business? Is this something that's going to add an additional income stream? What is the message here? And I had the answer to that was no. It's a hobby. And so that's where I decided to scale down to one episode every 2 weeks, which makes it manageable, which makes it fun, which helps me stay consistent. One of the other goals that I have for 2024 is to start the year by posting a series on financial independence. So I've already recorded those episodes. There's three or four different guests, and I'll be sharing their thoughts on what financial independence means to them from a UK perspective.
Great. So next we'll chat about finances. That's what I'd be interested to learning more about. And you've already touched on the fact that some of the past few years, you've managed to max out the £20,000 ISA allowance. As I said, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, so I know that you are currently renting in London, or at least in the south. You don't own a property at the moment, I don't think.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I'd just like to know what your plans or strategy is with your money and how you take care of your personal finances.
It's very, very simple at this stage in life. I didn't realize that there's a word for to describe this, but it just popped up on Instagram. Apparently, I'm a dink, a dual income, no kids. So not entirely intentional with the no kids. We're hoping to extend the family, but at the moment we're renting in London, and that means that our life is very simple. So investment vehicles, you got ISAs, LISAs, and pensions. And I would say that, gosh, 85, 90% of my invested capital is in ISAs. And I've got a small proportion in LISAs, just in case we do decide to buy a property, and the rest is in pensions. But with pensions, I have a direct debit that goes out the pension every single month. I'm self-employed, so it's a SIP, self-invested personal pension, and it's a nominal amount, but it's enough that I have to think about it. Think, all right, pension money goes in, and I will increase that as I get closer to retirement age. The way that I work my ISA is a little bit different. So, as I explained earlier on, I'm going to have a big chunk of money when being paid for this project. And when I get paid that money, I siphon off 25% for taxation. Then I'll pay myself a salary, which is normally fairly humble. And then I'll just pick a completely random number. So, say I get paid 10 grand, I don't know what it'll be. 25% goes off, and then I go, right, 4 grand. That sounds about right. I'll stick 4 grand in an ISA, which I can't do now because I've maxed out my ISA. But what I probably will do is take the same process and use Irina's, my wife's tax-free allowance, and take
Right.
advantage of that.
Right. And what are your financial goals in the next few years? Do you have any? Is it just continuing to do the same thing that you're doing now, or have you got any other plans?
We did a dream board at the end of 2023, which included some financial goals, and it also included just goals in life as well, like taking some more vacations. But yeah, the plan is just to continue we're in the boring middle, let's say, where we've got an allocated pot of money, and it's working for us, but we need to continue to add to that a little bit to stay on that path, and but never forgetting that you want to find joy in life as well. But I think we strike a fair balance. If anything, we want to allocate a little bit more money to something like vacations.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the joy in life part is important, because otherwise you become one of these people that you read about on the internet who's just very obsessed with the balance of the investments, and
Mm.
they see that as the main goal in life, to have that as big as possible, rather than using money as a tool, which primarily it is there for, because the value of money without spending it, it's just a bit meaningless, isn't it?
Yeah,
um
and tapping into what you said earlier on, like lessons learned from the podcast. One conversation that stands out to me was that someone describing when they became a millionaire, and they could see, on paper that they hit that amount, but that they were expecting something substantial to happen, for
mm,
the trumpet fanfares to come out, and it didn't happen, and it was just another number. And I can resonate with that actually with my own portfolio. So I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but you get to a number and you think, well, what's the next goal? I'll wait until it gets to this particular amount. And then it happens, and you go, oh, wow, that's a new high. Fantastic, great. And then it's, well, okay, well, right. And so it doesn't actually mean anything. It's what you do with that wealth, and how you plan your life that's more important.
yeah, definitely. And looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently with your finances?
In hindsight, yes, but also I'm quite glad that I made some mistakes. There are two main things that stand out to me. First of all, was the way that I got into investing was using a financial advisor. So I'm very thankful for the financial advisor for opening my eyes to the world of investments. And maybe you could even say that I discovered the personal finance community because of the relationship there. I don't think that was the case, but I'm being generous there. But on the other hand, extremely high fees and being put into funds that are just absolutely useless, like handing over thousands of cash in your 20s, and they're holding about 5% in cash. Oh, right, okay, aren't you supposed to be managing my wealth?
Yeah,
So look, there's a time and place for financial advice, and there's some fantastic financial advisors out there, and they are regulated in a way that we are not, and that is fantastic. But at this stage in my career, where I am, just having that automated plan is more important. And I do regret slightly that the fees that I was paying, which had exit charges and things like that, which, and anyone who knows about exit charges will know the company that I'm talking about, which I won't name here. So that's the first regret. But again, you go through something, you learn a lesson. And the other thing was investing in peer-to-peer lending in 2018. So I
right.
invested a couple of £1,000 in peer-to-peer, and it sounded great. It was a 2-year plan, 10% an annum or 8% an annum. You get your money back in 2 years. Well, it's now 2024 and I still haven't got the money back. So I do. It sounds like that it's the company went into administration.
Mm,
So there is a legal process that people are going through, and to get back half what I originally invested. So that's a harsh lesson to learn. But at the time, I knew that it wasn't protected by the Financial Conduct Authority. I knew that it was a very risky type of investment. I took that risk. I risked losing all of the capital, and I was happy that I did that. But also, it stands as a reminder to say, what is your financial plan? And now I simply go, well, if I ever invest in something like that in the future, it's fun money only, and I just stick with my index funds,
yeah,
really.
yeah. And I think that's a good point, and something to sort of flag and for people who are interested in personal finance content. I mean, for me personally, I'm quite cynical, or I question when people give me facts on the internet or things that they say are facts.
Mhm.
I question, is that actually true or not? Because if you're not a financial advisor, if you're not an expert in things, if you tell me to invest in something, or you say, you can't lose, it's a quick win, I'm like, is it? But I know that there's quite a few people who maybe believe things a lot more on the internet. And I think that's when some people find themselves investing in, or I shouldn't really call it investing, because some things are just pure speculation. It's a bit like gambling with your
Yeah,
money.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think while the internet's fantastic, and I think personal finance content is brilliant, your podcast is brilliant. It's very much making sure that the people you listen to are staying on the right side of, this is for interest, learn about what other people are doing with the money and come to your own decisions, rather than
Absolutely.
some people where there's lots of them who are saying, you want to make a million, this is what you do, follow these steps. And that's
Yeah,
what you've got to be quite critical and have your guard up again. So I think it is
100%,
important.
100%. But that's the wonderful thing about podcasting, right? So that's very much a TikTok narrative, isn't it? Follow these 5 steps, and you becoming a millionaire. Whereas in an hour's podcast or 45 minutes, you get to explore all the ups and downs. And if
Yeah.
people are on that journey with you, they will listen. I mean, one of the great blessings of podcasts analytics is you don't really know how much of an episode people are listening to. So you assume that they're listening to a proportion of it, but maybe not the whole thing. But I like
Mm,
to think that my listeners listen to a proportion of the episode, and they listen for that broad story, not just a clickbaity
yeah.
caption or title, so to say. The other thing to mention is crypto. So I do hold a very small proportion of crypto. Why? Again, fun money. There was a point in 2021 or 2022 where it was at all-time highs, and I felt like I was missing out. So I invested a little bit, as everyone did. And my mentality with that is to hold it and just to see where it goes. So I think that I am in the plus now, which is good, but I don't plan to sell. I just plan to hold it. I also I did think about setting up a direct debit just to add, a nominal amount each month, very, very insignificant. But if it did blow up, it would make a difference. But UK regulation makes that pretty difficult now. I know that I've tried with 2 different bank accounts, which now ban paying into cryptocurrencies. So it's
Right.
becoming more difficult actually to even get invested in it through conventional terms. So I must say that after trying 2 banks, I just went, oh, you know what, I can't be bothered. And I may come to regret that decision in the future, but it's fun money. It's not my long term, or it's not really, doesn't form part of my true financial plan. So it's fine.
Yeah. Cool. So moving on and thinking about your communication business, and this is something that I'm intrigued by, because I mean, people have picked up, if they're not familiar with you already listening on this podcast, you're very articulate. And for me, when I listen to your podcast, one of the benefits is that you are really good at holding an audience when you speak. Um, so yeah, so I just wondered if you wanted to tell us about your coaching business.
Mhm. Of course. Well, the first thing to say that wasn't always the case. I used to be painfully shy. So although that I did music, I was quite a chubby, well, when I say quite, a very chubby 13 or 14-year-old. And I didn't like meeting new people. I was very much an introvert, and I was forced into this artistic world by my own choice. And for a long time, I rebelled. So I talked about going to music college earlier on, 18, 19, 20. I was very, very shy, and I got constructive feedback all the time saying, your posture is terrible, the way that you walk, the way that you present yourself, you need to improve this. And there came a point where I said, yeah, if I want to continue in this profession, I'm gonna have to sort this out. So that's where I come from in terms of communication, and it's going through that journey that and having those experiences. That's why I feel very passionate, equally passionate about, as I do talking about money, as I do communication, because I can identify part of myself in how I see other people communicate. And I love to be able to help people work through that. A lot of what I do in coaching or discussions of video, it's dealing with the cringe. We all have the cringe at some point where we don't have the words that we want to say, or there's that internal feeling just where you want to die in a hole. And what you do with that feeling is very important. So previously, it's like I wanted the ground to swallow me up, and I was like, right, let's jump into this hole. Whereas nowadays, I've started to get used to that feeling. So if it comes, I go, all right, okay, that's there. I got some tools now. I'll make this feel a little bit better for myself, or I'll rationalize it in a different way. And then once you take that mentality, it opens up a whole host of other possibilities. Then you do say yes to going on a podcast or a YouTube interview or getting in front of 1,000 people to speak. You're not so phased.
Yeah. And so I know people can find you on your Instagram page and get links to if they want to have some coaching from you regarding communication. But I wonder just on this podcast whether you could give any tips for like top tips for if you're someone and maybe you're nervous speaking. And what I find I do is I use a lot of filler words. So when I'm a bit nervous, I'll sort of use all the sort ofs, the likes, the kind ofs. That's something when I listen to you on your podcast, you do very minimally.
Mm.
Everything that you say is quite intentional, if I'd call it that. So I just wonder, have you got any top tips for listeners about how
Mm.
to avoid those filler words that the majority of people do use?
Absolutely. So first of all, no one is perfect. I teach this stuff and I still use filler words, but I know myself well enough to understand when they come. So particularly when I'm tired, I will use filler words. If I'm under pressure or I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about so much, perhaps I'll use them then. So I still use them. But the problem about filler words is that they completely destroy the message that you're trying to get across to your audience. So if they're constant, and I work with a lot of Americans and Canadians, and they are constant, you don't even know what they're saying. There's no substance to the core message, and that's a big problem. So they come into you've mentioned already, two forms. So there's filler words and what I call sophisticated filler words. So filler words are just your normal whatever it is. And then the sophisticated filler words are sort of, kind of, you know what I mean, like. So I would break them down into those two thoughts. There's two reasons why you use both of those. And first of all, it's because you don't have a clear idea of what actually you want to say. And second of all, you want to get rid of that awkward silence. So again, going back to the cringe, the cringe leads you to say something, but then you're speaking without actually knowing what you want to truly say. So if we take a stupid example, like if you were to ask me a question like, what are your goals for 2024? In order to break the silence, I go immediately with a filler word. I go, my goals for 2024 are to become more fit. So there's a few things that are a mistake there. We've got the filler word. We've incorporated the question into the first line of the answer, which is a little bit of a boring way to speak. And we've given an answer, but it's not that inspiring. Versus if we take the same question, what are your goals for 2024? We think, what am I going to say? I've got to change my ways. I've got to change my habits. I am too unfit. My goals for 2024 is I want to improve my fitness. And the emphasis of what you're saying just completely changes. So maybe you have that just one little line at the beginning when you say something that stands out. Then that gives you emphasis of what you can say. But clinging on to a core idea is so much of a better idea than just gradually fading into it and hoping that you find something of substance to say. But filler words, everyone uses them. There's some podcasts that I listen to that I have to unsubscribe because I go, no, can't deal with it. I'm not getting the core message because
Mm,
those fillers are getting in the way. And that's a great shame. And sometimes I feel like I want to reach out and just say, just to let you know, I would really like what you do, but I'm hearing those fillers all the time. So I think it is a worthwhile goal, but it's not an easy journey, but it's absolutely possible to improve your communication. And it doesn't have to mean coaching with someone like me. It could just be becoming aware or starting a channel and just getting used to hearing yourself, because by those hours of editing, you will become accountable to yourself and go, oh, no, they're still there. Okay, next time I try a little bit better, and just find ways to the simple way to reduce them is just to have a zero tolerance and say, for the next 5 minutes, zero filler words. Every single word. So slow down your speech. Every single word that I'm going to say will have a meaning and a purpose. Zero filler words. And when you do that, you realize, oh, I can do this. And the problems then start to come when you've got spontaneous speaking or you want a certain type of speech pattern. So that all becomes part of the game, right?
yeah. And for me, creating this content, I've had to become used to listening to myself speak and listening to it back. And I can look back at my previous videos and I can see there's been a bit of a progression from me using the filler words a bit less, and I can see the scenarios where I use them a lot more, and those are the situations where I don't know what I'm about to say, and I'm trying to fill that silence because
Yeah.
I find it in the moment it's awkward, but actually when I listen to it back, it would have been better just leave a silence there rather than trying to pad it out with useless words.
Yes, you're right that it's the cringe can stop us from taking action. That sense of cringe can feel so substantial and overwhelming in the moment that it feels comfortable to actually indulge in that, to go, actually, yeah, I'm just gonna use a load of filler words because that's what works for me, forgetting that your audience out there, it completely disassociates yourself from your core message. So sometimes you need to detach yourself from the feeling of how it feels for you, and remember that what you're trying to do is get a key message across.
Great. Yeah, so we're coming at the end of the episode now. And so one last question is just, yeah, is there anything from you that you want to ask me? Any thoughts that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So we spoke 2 years ago, so perhaps you can tell me what has changed in your personal finance life since we last spoke. Have you made any big milestones, or have you tweaked your investing mentality at all?
Yeah, good question. So at the time when I spoke to you, it was January 2022. My current mortgage balance at that time was just over £130,000. Um, I have, well, me and my partner, we've reduced that mortgage balance by over £20,000 in those 2 years. I've
Wow.
contributed more to my stock and shares ISA, so I invest in a global index fund through the Vanguard platform, and I've built up an emergency fund. So when I look back, I have made substantial dents in my mortgage.
Mm,
And one of my reflections from last year was there was some months where I didn't overpay or invest at all, and it really lost momentum for my journey. So one of my goals for this year is to invest, overpay, and save every single month, regardless of what that amount is. So being less focused on the amount and being more focused on just having that habit there,
mm,
because as soon as I lose that momentum, it sort of stops. So it's much easier for me if I see myself as someone who does those three things every single month, and that is
mm.
my commitment to myself. But yeah, it's definitely become a better financial situation. I mean, I was already in a
Mm.
fairly good financial situation when I spoke to you last time, but it has improved. And I think listening to content, creating content, it keeps you accountable, definitely.
Mm. And tell me a little bit about, well, certainly since we last spoke, 2 years. I can't believe it's been 2 years, and almost to the day or to the month. A lot has changed in the mortgage market. So, were you on a 2 year? Were you on a 5 year or 10 year? How is that going to change? Will that put you under more pressure in the future?
So fortunately, and I am very lucky because it wasn't necessarily a plan because no one knew that the interest rates were going to skyrocket. When in October of 2021, we remortgaged for 5 years at a 1.16% interest rate. And
Nice.
if we had remortgaged the year later, that 1.16% interest rate would have actually been probably 5 or 6%.
Oh my
And
gosh.
we were debating at the time, do we fix for 5 years? Do we fix for 3 or 2? And I sort of thought, well, interest rates aren't really going to be much, if they get any lower, you can't really get much lower than 1.16. So it's going to be a very small
It's marginal, isn't it?
saving.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas if they increase, then we could be losing out on a lot of money. And the impact on that, I've got quite a fairly low mortgage balance because I live in the northeast. So, if it was 100 grand, for example, the difference between me paying 1% versus 5%, that's a difference of 4 grand in the year that
Mm, mm.
I don't have to pay the bank in interest. So that's been really fortunate. And actually, it's funny because a lot of the comments I get on my YouTube videos about mortgage overpayments are people who comment and say, "Oh, you're only on a 1% interest rate. Why on earth are you still overpaying your mortgage?" But for me, I know that in the future, when I come off this 5 year fix, I'm going to be jumping onto one of these higher rates. So all
Mm.
that overpaying I've done so
Yeah, less
far,
debt to pay for, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. So it's saving that interest because we've overpaid by over 20 grand now. Yes, 1% of 20 grand isn't that much, but 4 or 5% of 20 grand per year, that's starting to add up. But yeah, so fortunate that I'm not affected at the moment by the higher interest rates, but I know that there's a lot of people who I know personally who have been affected, and I think particularly for first-time buyers, it's really changed the availability for them of what they can purchase because they have to factor in this high interest rate, high sort of accrual of interest into the figures.
Yeah, yeah, it's a massive change, and yeah, it seems that the years of those type of interest rates are long gone. So yeah, great foresight there to say, well, actually, I think that wasn't luck. That was you being perhaps financially savvy, financially aware. And you say, well, if what's the benefit if it drops by 0.3? Is that really going to help me versus if it goes up by a percent or two? So that was really wise. Well done. But the whole market's changed, and it certainly makes me and Irina question our motives of where we want to be in the long term, and it's kicking the can a little bit. But I think that's no bad thing. And as you will have heard on my podcast, we speak quite a lot about home ownership and the question of when is the right time. Everyone's circumstances are different, but I'm really pleased to hear that it's all going well.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks for thanks for that conversation. It's been really great to chat to you again. And where should people find you on the internet? Where's best to find out your details?
The best place to find me is on the Art of Money and Communication podcast, available on all podcast platforms. And if you do want to find out more information about me, then you can just click on the show notes and you'll find all the info there. But it's the Art of Money and Communication podcast. Loads of episodes. So please feel free to tune in.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joshua, and thanks everyone for listening. And I'll see you on the next video.